Good morning, everyone. Welcome to United Way's The Question Before Us. I'm Bobby Watt-Geer, President and CEO of United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania. We're so happy you joined us this morning. This is our second installment of this series where we discuss topics concerning our community so we can create solutions together. We had a tremendously positive feedback on our first session held in January of 2021. And if you missed that, you can find it on United Way's YouTube channel. And that is magically dropping into our chat box right now for you to find it easily. We are so grateful to the Eaton Hall Foundation for sponsoring today's program. Eaton Hall's support of United Way is so appreciated, and it makes it possible for us to do so much important work in our region, including making today's program available to our community and helping us to engage people like you in these important discussions. So here we are, it's April, and in most other years, families with school-age children would be busy making plans for the summer and figuring out how to best occupy the time and imaginations of our children during their time home from school. But like so many things this past year, that question has been turned upside down. During the pandemic, children had been largely isolated at home like the rest of us, separated from each other and from those places and activities that provide structure: schools, libraries, religious services, and other activities. As things begin to open, it's not as easy as just throwing open the door and saying everything is back to normal. We're in a really critical and delicate time for families and for children. We need to re-engage young people with others and reconnect them with the broader community. But how do we do that in a healthy and positive way? One that acknowledges the tremendous stress that we've all been under, but especially our children. Is this an opportunity to do better than just getting back to normal? What can we do to make this a more equitable, more nurturing community for our children? We are very fortunate today to have Michelle Figlar and a panel of experts to discuss and navigate these issues. Let me introduce Michelle, a longtime friend. Michelle is the Vice President for Learning at the Heinz Endowments, overseeing the endowment's strategy that focuses on family child well-being, holistic education, community, and workforce readiness. Before joining the foundation in 2016, Michelle served as the Deputy Secretary of the Pennsylvania Office of Child Development and Early Learning, otherwise known as OCDEL. She has been the Executive Director of the Pittsburgh Association for the Education of Young Children, PACE, which is now Trying Together, a Program Manager for the Office of Early Childhood in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, a Head Start Director in Chicago, Illinois, a preschool education teacher and VISTA volunteer in Northern California, where she developed curriculum and programming with family child care providers. Michelle also had the opportunity to serve as a Head Start Fellow and spent time working with several national nonprofit advocacy groups. Michelle is also honored to have served as the co-chair of the Allegheny County Executive Rich Fitzgerald's Children's Fund Community Working Group, the co-chair of United Way's United for Children Committee, a board member for the Birmingham Foundation, the United Way of Pennsylvania, Grantmakers of Pennsylvania, and a member of the PA Early Learning Council. Michelle's greatest joy in life is spending time with her family, residing here in the city of Pittsburgh with her husband, Greg Quinlan, son, Grady, and daughter, Tilly. Welcome and good morning, Michelle. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you so much for that really nice introduction. And
Michelle, we're having trouble with your audio.
You can't hear me. Okay, hang on just a second. I apologize.
Can you hear me now?
We cannot hear you. You are not muted, but I'm wondering if it is. Okay, we're saying we can hear you now.
Is this better?
Yes, Michelle, we can hear you fine. Thank you.
Is this better?
Yes, Michelle, we're able to hear you.
Okay, I apologize. I am so sorry, everybody out there. I apologize. So thank you, Bobby, and thank you for the really nice introduction. And I'm totally thrilled to be here and that you asked me to lead this conversation. I wanted to remind everyone here that we also want to hear from you. So please feel free to use the chat function to share your questions and comments during the Q&A section of the program, and I will work to answer as many of them as possible. So we're going to do some texting back and forth, and our experts today really want to hear from you. So our topic today may not be on top of mind for all of you, considering the huge issues that have been swirling around recently. But this is one that not only parents like myself should be discussing. It is one that will have long-term consequences for all of us. This past year, everyone, but especially our children and youth, have had to deal with disruption in our lives and our activities. We've been isolated and shut out from friends and loved ones. We found out that some of us were better equipped and much more privileged than others to deal with the situation. But one thing is certain: as we move into the recovery phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, this is uncharted territory for our children, and they are going to need help readjusting and adapting to this not quite normal life. It's going to take parents, educators, the community at large, all of us to come together and chart a path for them. And yes, we will be doing that while we are all getting our own lives back on more stable ground, and as we continue to try to navigate this virtual world. So let's start with what we know. In the 5-county United Way footprint, there are more than 411,000 children and youth below the age of 18. And although we do not have any disaggregated local data just for one area, the CDC has published a study on mental health for this age group nationwide. It shows up to a 31% increase in mental health emergencies for children ages 5 to 18. Remember, those are just the reported cases. So I really want us to pause and think about that. That's going to help frame our conversation today. We have to remember that our children and youth have experienced a year like no other, and it has to be the responsibility for all of us to think about the path moving forward. The reasons behind this include many, but they are persistent and growing inequities in access to educational tools, particularly for children in low income and Black and Brown communities. Abrupt and ongoing changes in our routines. A break in continuity for learning, virtual to hybrid learning, technology and connectivity issues. Greater breaks in healthcare, such as routine wellness, immunizations, and access to things like speech therapy and occupational therapy. Missed life events, birthdays, vacations, graduations, and the inability to grieve together when a loved one has passed. And ultimately, a loss of security and safety, not just from the fear of the virus, but also housing and food insecurity, possibly seeing parents lose jobs, unable to find work. Just a significant increase in stress, which we all feel and manifests itself differently in children. Some shut down and some act out. So how do we help our children move forward? How do we help them re-engage, reconnect? And how do we do it equitably and with empathy? Those are the questions before us today. And to help us unravel it and begin to answer it, I am thrilled to introduce you to our panel of experts to join the discussion. I woke up this morning just so happy, realizing that today was the day that I was going to be able to talk to dear colleagues, experts, and friends. So first, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Valerie Kinloch. Dr. Kinloch is the Renee and Richard Goldman Dean of the University of Pittsburgh School of Education. Happened to be the place where I went to school, so go Pitt, hail Pitt. There she is dedicated to strengthening the school's commitment to urban education, diversity, inclusion, and community engagement. She comes to Pitt after 9 years on the faculty at The Ohio State University, where she was professor of literacy studies and the associate dean of diversity, inclusion, and community. Dr. Kinloch has a Master of Arts in English and African American Literature and a PhD in English and Composition Studies. She's a published author of numerous books on race and literacy, including the critically acclaimed Harlem on Our Minds, Place, Race, and the Literacies of Urban Youth. Not only that, she is such a treasure to our city, and we are so happy and so honored and so lucky to have you here, Dr. Kinloch. So thank you. I'm also going to welcome Dr. Dana Winters, another good friend. And Dr. Winters is the Rita McKinley Endowed Professor of Early Learning in Children's Media and Director of Simple Interactions and Academic Programs for the Fred Rogers Center at St. Vincent College. As we know, Fred Rogers and his wife, Mrs. Rogers, who just passed recently, left an enormous legacy of serving the needs of children. And Dr. Winters is carrying on the work and expanding it through her work at the center. That work includes projects involving children's helpers across many diverse settings, such as childcare, school systems, community programs, residential care, and children's hospitals. Dr. Winters has a PhD in Administrative and Policy Studies from the University of Pittsburgh and an MA in Education from Indiana University of Pennsylvania and a bachelor's in Sociology from St. Vincent College. And I've had the opportunity to work intimately with the project there, and there is just such wonderful wealth of knowledge on how to interact with children and their caregivers. So welcome to both of you. I'm just so delighted to have you both here today. Okay, so are you ready to get started?
I'm ready.
All right, all good. So let's just jump in. So I'm going to ask the first question to both of you, and Dr. Kinloch, I'm going to ask you to start off. So from your perspective, and I teed us up talking about how the future is going to look for our children and youth and how we should think about re-engaging them. So from your perspective, what have been the most concerning factors impacting children during the past year of COVID-19 and the past year of isolation?
Thank you for the question, Michelle. And let me just thank you for hosting. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with you, Dana and Michelle. So thanks for having me. I think that's a really important question. And it's hard to answer with just one sort of what is the major factor. And so I'll give a few that I think have been really concerning and impacting children during the past year. I think first and foremost is this rhetoric or this discourse of trying to go back to a normal that some people had, and I would argue that a lot of people didn't have. I think the normal that some folks want to go back to is really highly defined by access to resources and spaces and technologies that many students, many kids, many young adults did not have access to. And so I think when we think about this past year, we have questions about what have our kids not been exposed to that they should have always been exposed to? What are the available resources that should have been made available to all of our kids in all of our communities, particularly, kids of color in schools where we need more resources, or we might have the resources, but we don't allocate those resources in the best ways to benefit young people. And so I think those are some of the factors. But in addition to that, to step outside of just thinking about schooling and to think about everything else that happens around schooling, I think some of those other factors include ensuring that kids have loving spaces and places that do not harm them. I think some of those spaces are in their communities and maybe not always in schools. I think being able to not return to, but pause and figure out ways that we can really think deeply and critically about how to center kids and young adults in every single thing that we do, and to not make our kids and young adults an afterthought, to center their joy, to center their lives, to center their curiosities. And oftentimes, those are some of the things that get left behind when we look at this past year and even beyond.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Kinlock. You're so right. Centering children and youth at the center of everything we do. So I just want to lift that up and ask everyone to hold on to that. So tell me, Dana, what do you think from your perspective?
I want to echo Valerie to say how grateful I am for the opportunity to be with you here today, Michelle and Valerie. One of the notes I made on this same question was what Valerie just ended with. So I think I'll start there, which is that many children and young people, their voices have been muted even further over the last year. Much of their lives have been dictated to them. And so what little agency they may have had before, they've almost lost completely. So how do we, as we re-engage, be sure that children and young people are seen, are heard, they feel that they matter, not just that it's in language only, but they truly feel that they are seen, they have agency. I think that is a product of some of the many changes over the last year as well. Changes that have obviously altered the lives of many children, but also have we've come front and center with many things that were happening that may have been less seen. Something that Valerie mentioned as well, that these were happening all around, but the pandemic and the current situation have certainly shine a brighter light on some of these challenges and issues. And I think that the last year and the lack of ability to serve children in holistic ways. So children are now lacking some consistency, some structure, which I believe is something you mentioned in the beginning too, Michelle, the structure of a learning environment, the consistency of having those safe, loving spaces, the relationships that they had come to know. So many of those were interrupted. And that affects how children live holistically. They may still have the demands of life, but they might not have the same nurturing from many outlets that they had before. So when I think about the concerns and the issues that are addressing our children in the past year, my mind immediately jumps to how do we continue to make sure that we're taking care of the child and young people as a whole, and not in fragmented pieces, which seems to be how the last year has come to be.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dr. Winter. So I'm going to stick with you for a minute, and you both have talked about some of the challenges, the concerning factors that impacted children throughout this year. So as we begin our slow return back into the community, what's going to be necessary to address these issues? So what are some of the things we're going to need to do?
Sure. I want to stop and think for a moment about the word you just used, which is slow return, and how important it is that we think about it as a slow return. The lives of so many of us abruptly changed just in such a short period of time. And as Dr. Kinlock mentioned in her beginning comments too, this idea of returning back to normal, that's a narrative that is very dangerous right now. When we think of how we help our children to re-engage, when I think of slowness, I think of what it means to take our time, to reconnect, to take our time to rebuild, to reintegrate into learning environments, into community environments, that everything changed very quickly. It does not mean that we should try to return back to something familiar just as quickly. That we've all gone through a collective experience, albeit not in the same ways. We all have had many different reactions to these experiences based on our own communities and our own needs. And all of those things must be taken into account as we return to what comes next, or we move on to what comes next, that we can't just try to, I also am getting a little antsy with the narrative of we have to catch up. We have to get back to where we could have been now. And that, I don't think that's the goal. The goal is to take our time, to rebuild, to help people to heal from many, many different challenges over the last year, and to really make sure that our children are seen and heard, and that our children are given a chance to express what this time has meant to them and how best we can heal together, taking our time in a very slow return to what will come.
Thank you so much for empathizing about the slowness and how important it is for us to take our time and to acknowledge what we've all experienced, but especially our children. So Dr. Kinloch, I would love to hear your thoughts about this slow return back to community.
Thank you. I've been thinking about that, and I agree with what Dana is saying here in terms of the slow return back to community. And at the same time, I don't know if a lot of people have the option of taking a slow return back. And so on the one hand, while I would hope that we can slowly return and refigure and rebuild and reimagine, I'm just aware that so many people don't have the opportunity to take a slow return and to re-enter because they've never left. And the struggles and the hardships that they have encountered, these things haven't allowed them to do what many of us do, which is to stay at home and to work from home. So there hasn't really been a pause for many people. And so I like the idea of taking it slowly, but I also understand that we need to have systems and structures in place that would allow us to do that, that would allow us to at least pause a bit and to think deeply about what we're trying to re-enter. And maybe we're not trying to re-enter a society that many of us left. I think we're trying to enter into something different, something more equitable, something that where we can talk about not just educational equity, but we can actually implement structures that are equitable and that are grounded in equality. And unfortunately, I don't think that has been the case. And so when we talk about returning to, I think the thing that I want to highlight, the work that so many organizations and people did before this pandemic and have continued to do throughout the pandemic. And I'm pretty sure that they will continue to do it even after the pandemic has ended. You know, it's the community-based organizations that have never left our kids, even when we might still have to go to work and our kids are there. Community-based organizations, I mean, the Homewood Children's Village being one of the most prominent ones that I can think of, they've always had an agenda to uplift and elevate folks in communities, particularly the youngest of us all. And so I just think that when we think about re-entering, when we think about what's next, when we think about this question, what will be necessary to address, we will do ourselves a disservice, in my opinion, if we are not thinking deeply about the relationships among schools and communities and community organizations and social service agencies. I think we've got a lot to learn from community groups. And I think that return back into will all be grounded around what continues to happen within community-based organizations. And so I just want to make sure to uplift our community-based organizations, even those organizations that are the smallest, that don't have all the resources that they should have, but they have never wavered in their commitment to continuing to provide services and shelter and food and security for so many people.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Kinloch. And there are several comments in the chat agreeing and applauding and saying thank you for those comments. So thank you. You are spot on. I'm going to switch the questions for just a second to continue that thread. And Valerie, I want you to expand a little bit more, if you could, about how the issues of the past year have been the same or different for children in Black and Brown neighborhoods, and talk a little bit more about what you're thinking and what you recommend for us as our children and youth Some of them, continuing to go to the neighborhood group or as they start to go back into school, but as we go into this time of summer. So I'm going to let you expand on that. Thanks.
Okay. So what are some of the issues that have been the same or different?
Yes. For children living in Black and Brown communities.
Wow, this is a great question. It's kind of a personal question in many ways. So honestly, I sit and I think about the things that I've always thought about even before I moved to Pittsburgh. I go back to my home community in Charleston, South Carolina, and I've talked about Charleston in some ways vaguely, many times over in different environments. And, if I'm being honest, I think about the position that I have as Dean of a School of Education in comparison to the roles that almost every single person in my family continues to play, whether it's in South Carolina or in Georgia or in Florida. And I think about the realities of many of the youngest in my family who are either in middle school or high school, and what they are experiencing. And in many ways, I look at the structure of schools and I think about what schools have provided for them, but really I also think about what schools have not provided for them. When I think about Black and Brown people, when I think about people of color, when I think about Black people in particular, and I think about our children and our young adults, a number of things come to mind. I think about access to technology. I think about how some of my cousins who are in high school, they have access to technology, but they don't really have access to technology in the ways that I see everyone else having access to. I think about the ways that we have to advocate for people, even people who are in our own families. I think about struggle often. I don't think there's a single day that goes by that I'm not thinking about struggle, or at least in the midst of struggle, where I'm trying to understand how systems have continued to disenfranchise so many Black and Brown kids. And it's the kids in Charleston who I'm talking about, but it's also some of the kids here. And yet I have to say this. As I think about all these disenfranchisement and oppression, I also think about the joy that they have. I think about how they remain hopeful, even in the midst of ongoing racism and a global pandemic. And then I start to wonder, what is it that we need to do differently to capitalize on that joy, to think about who they are as joyful human beings, and then to take that joy and to create structures that actually elevate that joy as opposed to continuing to reproduce that inequality and inequity. And so those are some of the things that come to mind, especially when I think about kids of color in communities and in schools of color. They have a history that we have not yet paid attention to across the globe, and we have to do better at paying attention to what they say they need from us and what they actually do.
Thank you for that. So powerful. So Dr. Winters, I'm gonna throw it back to you. And Dr. Kinlock talked about the joy, and you alluded to this as well. So what is the balance between the need for addressing the social and emotional needs and the joy of our children and youth and the academic needs? So you talked about this rhetoric around being behind, but I want to lift up the social emotional needs of our children.
Absolutely. And I want to just thank you, Dean Kinlock, for your comments. That's, you've made me think so much about what it means. I love the idea of joy and building around joy. And when we think of the social emotional connections around children, and should we favor this above academic learning? I don't know that I see a true distinction there. I think that academic learning is supported through our social emotional connections, and that academic learning really, it builds upon the foundation of the connections that we have, and it builds upon the foundation of understanding the deep needs of children and meeting those inner needs of children. And while the outsides of how we address academic learning right now may feel very different, those needs of children are maybe more pronounced than ever. And so it's taking all of that collectively into consideration. When we think of social emotional connection and what it means to capitalize on the joy of our children and young people, it means seeing our children and young people. It means giving them voice into what comes next, to be sure that we're listening to their needs and not just marching forward with our own agendas. And I think that that comes with understanding and meeting the social emotional needs of children and young people, and that academic learning can be a part of that, that learning activities are a part of social emotional connection all the time. But I don't know that I see that we have to choose one over the other, that they can both move forward together in a process of healing and in a process of rebuilding what could be even better than anything we had before.
Thank you for that. Valerie, I would love to hear your thoughts about that, about balancing the need for addressing social, emotional, and joy and academic needs.
Sure. I think what Dana said is absolutely true. I think that we have to figure out ways. So when I say center, I want to center. I want to center joy in everything that we do. I want to center what a kid walks into a space grappling with, thinking about, excited about. I want us to create opportunities that are built around what that kid is doing in that moment, as opposed to taking the joy out of it to focus on a curriculum that is oftentimes scripted, and a curriculum that is scripted and stripped from a kid's socio-emotional needs and well-being and curiosities. And so I think that it's absolutely the case that we have a balance amongst all those things: joy, curiosity, academic learning. And yet I think the reality oftentimes is that so many people don't see the joy in academic learning. And yet they leave our classrooms and they go into the hallways or into communities, and they're engaging in learning differently in ways where we're not always accounting for inside of our classrooms. And so I want the alignment across these areas, but I also want to start with just the fundamental idea of joy. I want to get a deeper understanding. It's not just let me feel something. It is let me sense what another person is experiencing. Let me actually name the pain. Let me actually invite you to name that pain. And then we navigate that pain in order to get to another place. And that place is one of care and joy. And unfortunately, even from my own experiences, unfortunately, I just don't think that academic learning is often joyful for so many people. If academic learning was joyful, we would not have all of these high push out rates. And so, and push out in terms of pushing out of schools. Now, I will say that I've seen learning happening in community spaces. And it's the most amazing thing to see and to experience. And I'm always wondering, why can't we actually bring that into what we do in our school spaces? And that's the kind of joy that I think we could really build from when we think about what happens in communities. How is it that kids have an automatic connection to other people and ideas and learning? And then when we get them into schools, sometimes that doesn't translate into that same type of action. And so I would love to have that alignment. And I think that we've got to have some structures in place that would support it.
Thank you for that. It really makes me remember my early childhood background, right? So when I think about how we think about early learning spaces and the way we embrace play and play as the way that children learn, we have a very strong pedagogy that these two things have to work together. So play is learning, joy is work. They don't have to be separate from each other. So Dana, I know that you've seen a lot of that in the Simple Interactions work about bringing joy into the classroom. So I don't know if you have anything else anything else you want to share there, but I think like we can't keep those two things in separate spaces, right? I mean, just like all of us on this webinar today, I hope that we find joy in what we get up and do every day. So, you know, we have to instill that in our children. And maybe another question is, as you both are teaching in the School of Education, how do you help your student teacher or the student in your classroom bring that joy with them when they go into the learning environment? I kind of snuck that question in on you. No, Dana, if you want to start.
Sure. So I think a lot of that messaging is the same for seasoned educators as it is for our pre-service teachers, which is reminders of why they are there. Remembering back and trusting what got them to that place in the first place. The love of children is a sense of joy. The love of helping young people is a sense of joy, whether you're in a formal classroom or you're in a community park or you're in a museum setting, that you don't get into the profession of education or the vocation of education if you don't have a joy for helping children and young people and adults. So I think giving reminders of why that's important and why that is still true, even in the midst of all of this, that joy can still be present. And that joy sometimes means an increased sense of trust in yourself as an educator, that you have the experience and the training and the love necessary to continue to nurture children and young people through what's coming.
Valerie, any additional thoughts on that?
I mean, Dana just said it. And, you know, Dana said love. And that's something that sometimes folks have trouble even saying. And if we can't say it, then how can we embody it and how can we give it to other people, particularly our kids? And so I think Dana said it and it's spot on. I mean, we hopefully enter into this profession with a deep love for other people, you know, that deep level of empathy that we have to extend to other people, even if we don't really understand. We seek to understand, we seek to at least be present. And I think that's what we have to ensure that even our student teachers have, but we can't do that work if we don't do that work with and on ourselves. And so we've got to do that work every single day. And even when we fall short, we got to acknowledge that we've fallen short and we've got to get back up. We need to apologize. We need to extend grace to other people in the hopes that they extend grace to us. And then we got to enter into these learning environments, doing the exact same thing with and for our kids and young adults. And so it's about being human, and being human doesn't mean being perfect. It's about entering into systems that might be oppressive. And somehow there's a reason why we enter into these systems every single day, even if they're oppressive, because we seek to change things and leave a better place for other people yet to be here. So it's that love that Dana talked about.
Yes, for sure. I'm going to ask one more question, and then there's several questions in the chat, and I know that there are lots of people out there, but I can only see the two of you on my screen. So I'm going to ask a question that's a bit more personal for me as well. So as a mom of a 13-year-old and an almost 15-year-old, and thinking about it's April 12th, what are 3 things or 7 things or 1 thing that parents can do right now? Like, so, you know, I only see the two of you. What should I be worried about? What shouldn't I be worried about? Right. So I've got these teenagers that I just want them to be able to, you know, at first I'm thankful for every blessing we have, and I'm thankful for their health. But what advice do you have for us as parents? Dr. Kinlock, I'm going to throw it to you first.
That pause was, I was hoping Dana was going to pick this up first.
Okay, we can give it to Dana first. So
Dana's looking like, I don't know.
We go rock, paper, scissors for this one if you'd like.
Yeah, let me just pretend it's the 3 of us. What would you tell me?
I think the first thing, Michelle, that I would say is, as a mom of two nearly the same age children as you, I'm going to acknowledge your unknowing and your frustration and your wonderings as valid and shared. I think there are a lot of families out there feeling the same pressure of uncertainty. And what I'd like to do is actually evoke a little bit of Fred Rogers here. I don't know that anybody didn't see this one coming, but I've found deep comfort in some of Fred's teachings around his own parenting recently. And one in particular where he said that he found that it was just a comfort to him to know that it doesn't have to be perfect in order to be effective. And that's what he referenced his own parenting and saying there were times when he couldn't give his children everything they wanted or needed. He couldn't be there all the time, but he has come to know that it doesn't have to be perfect to be effective. And I think that that's something that we can take to heart as families, is that in our imperfection, we're still growing together as families, that we care deeply about our children, and that care and evoking that same love that educators have for children, that families have for children, that maybe we don't know all of the right answers right now. We may not have all of the tools, but we certainly have the foundation of knowing our children, of wanting what's best for them. And in that respect, understanding that the way that we work with our children, the way that we work with the caring adults outside of our homes that also are alongside our children for this journey. So whether that's our educators, our coaches, our mentors, that we're all sharing our own experiences with our children, that we're able to grow together through this, I think has been hopeful for me, is when I, as a mom, look at the past and see others who I have certainly held on pedestals of parenting glory, to see that they struggled as well. And that as we struggle through this, that relying on that basic care, that basic, I think that Valerie likened it to that humanity of one another, to give grace to one another, to give grace to ourselves, that we won't have the one right answer. And sometimes what we think might be the one right answer is going to generate far more questions, and being able to extend that grace to our children as well as we all navigate together.
And see, that's why I turned it over to Dana, because she said it. I think folks know I don't have my own kids. And I think the reality is this, I don't have my own kids, but I have so many kids, if that makes sense. And I'm always in relation to young folks. I will sit on the floor with them. I will do whatever I need to do to extend love. And yet I am always aware of my positionality. And so whenever I'm asked questions about, what advice do I have for parents, I will be honest. I tend to not provide advice for parents because I don't have kids, but I also understand that to parent is to engage in probably the most important work that there is. And I watch, I listen, I observe, I think with people. And I would say I don't offer advice because I think, the reality is this. I do believe that it takes all of us. It's, that village concept, but it also requires us to have patience with everyone and to sit back and to just be present and to offer support as opposed to telling people how they should live their lives. And that's what I think I do. And to do that then means I have to be ready for, the kids to swarm me. And that's fine. And it happens, but that's the joy that I get. And it's also being able to just be in conversation with families and to listen to what they say they need, and then to be able to go out there and try to get what they say they need, or to provide those resources for people and those opportunities.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. And that listening to us as parents is the best gift you can give us. So thank you for that. I'm going to switch there's a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to turn to those for a minute, and let me pull them up. So give me just 1 second here. So Valerie, one of the questions in the chat is that you have highlighted that this year may have brought environments that value the joy and success of kids otherwise marginalized. Do you see Pittsburgh Public Schools and other school districts meaningfully adapting to this? It's a
Do
big.
you want me to answer that question? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
It's a question in the chat. So,
I'm gonna have to go into the chat to see who posed that question, so I can email him, her, or them later, because that's a great question. So I will say this, and I'm gonna say it this way. I think that we all have a responsibility to play. I am not naming districts or universities or people. What I want to do is to think about the types of programs and initiatives that we currently have that we might need to think about restructuring in order to meet the needs of our kids and young adults, and by extension, their families and the larger communities. I think what I want to see programs and initiatives that are based in communities, that involve families and parents, that involve the folks who play an instrumental role in people's lives. And so, are there programs in our school districts that do that? I would say yes. Are there programs in communities that do that? I would say yes. Are there programs that span our school districts, and I'm saying districts in the plural, and communities? I think we need more of those. I think that instead of creating new, we should look and see what we have in front of us, and we should invest in those programs and initiatives, particularly the ones that are in communities. And I think if we could do that without having to have our names on it, but to be able to have our kids' faces at the center of this work, then we would be much more successful. And I really believe that we know how to address and eliminate educational inequities. I truly believe we do. But if we are not willing to have deep partnerships and collaborations that span spaces and include various people, and that have kids and young adults at the table directing us, I'm not sure how far we get. So I hope that's an answer without necessarily being an answer to the question.
No, I think it's a great answer. And I think we've seen lots of collaboration through this time. And that's what brings a lot of hope to me, because I've seen organizations and school districts and community members come together. We need more of that, right? That we need more of that, not just adapting, I think embracing, right? And really embracing a different way of doing our work. I mean, and many of us have had to embrace this sort of technology that I'm on with you today. Not my favorite way to be in a room with you both, right? I would much rather be in a space with you. So, how do we come from this, not just just adapting, but embracing collaborations? So I think there's some hope there. Dana, how do we help our teachers and educators feel like they can address the whole child? Is there something more we can be doing so that we don't think about what our children need in sort of siloed approaches?
Sure. So I think our educators need to be supported in that same way. We're not going to make a lasting impact on children if we skip over the needs of our educators, the needs of our families, the needs of our community providers. That the adults in this conversation need that same support, which means a lot of the pressure that is put onto children around academic learning and meeting those needs is directly from the pressure that is put on educators from outside forces, from sometimes from systems, from administration, from states. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so how do we best help our educators to see that they are encouraged and given the ability to meet the needs of children the way that they were trained, the way that they know that children need to be addressed right now. So how do we lessen the burden on our educators so that they in turn don't feel that they have to turn and put that burden potentially on our children? That is larger than just asking our educators to do more. We can't ask them to do more and more and more. We have to help to navigate that system in a way that truly centers the importance of our children's needs, but also the importance of our educators' needs, that they are being served and being met and being loved right alongside our children and young people as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I have, experienced both of my children's teachers doing so much with texting and technology and reaching out to us and them throughout the day on the weekends. And those are some of the things that I hope will really stick with us, right? Because it's also allowed us to have a relationship in a way that we really didn't have before. So there are so many things about this, making sure we nurture and think about the teacher's need and the community and community's needs through all of this as well. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about how you see children re-engaging through sports and summer activities and play, and why is that important and why should we encourage that? And then I'll talk a little bit about what we're hoping is going to happen this summer, but why is it important for us to be thinking about that physical activity and that joy that kids can get from being in a playful space? Dr. Winters, I'll throw it to you first.
Sure. So I think the playful space can act really as a bridge as well. So it's important. It's not just a means to an end. It's means and end in itself. It's both. But it also gives us a bridge into more structured formal spaces that seem to be reemerging, but likely won't look as familiar maybe until the fall or even beyond that. But community spaces are work in the summers around allowing children to grow through learning activities that might not be school activities, but are certainly activities to learn and grow. I think are incredibly important as bridges into what comes next. That allows our children, those who have been virtually learning, those who have been hybrid and going back and forth, to find a little sense of internal normalcy, possibly, that to return to something that has been missing, but feels a little bit more familiar as a bridge to what comes next for them.
Valerie?
Sure. Let me add in, I think, I know play allows all of us to discover parts of ourselves that we otherwise probably would not have discovered. You know, play, whether it's sports, whether it's performance, whether it's poetry, whether it's just singing and dancing with other people without being watched. Play allows us to develop confidence in who we are. It allows us to be a part of a larger community that we define, that we help to shape, as opposed to a community that is already defined and shaped for us. I just think play and activity and movement of whatever kind allows us to discover the world. You know, there are these critical literacy scholars, Paulo Freire being one of them, and then a lot of other critical literacy scholars, particularly Black women, who talk about, you know, we need to read the world and the word, and play allows people to read the word, whether it's the text, whether it's language being exchanged amongst people, but at the same time, we're allowed to be in the world and to read the world. And play allows us to just have a sense of freedom and exploration and discovery without having to feel confined. And our kids need that freedom. Our kids need to be able to play. Our kids need to not be monitored and not be watched. And play allows us, I hope, for kids to explore who they are in the different spaces that they occupy.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So what is being done, or what do you know about what's happening across the larger community to help children and youth re-engage this summer? Or I don't think I'm not sure if the term re-engage is right, because Valerie, you helped to frame us by saying many children and community organizations have just been doing the work throughout. But what do you know about what might be happening to help children and families right now?
So I think I may have mentioned Homewood Children's Village earlier. And I mean, all the work that they have always been doing before the pandemic and after the pandemic, I'm sure will continue. And so the Homewood Children's Village is one of those organizations, those groups that they have an outright commitment to ensuring that young folks and the communities and the families have experiences that they rightfully deserve. And so I would say that would be one example. But in addition to that, the work that Kathy Elliott is doing with Gwen's Girls, I mean, phenomenal work. It's a focus on girls and women. I mean, it's a focus on ensuring that we have access and we have spaces, and we know that we are whole human beings, and that we see each other and other people see us. And there's so many other organizations doing this work. And I will say that I absolutely love the work that's coming from both of those organizations. It's like with Gwen's Girls, for example, when we take a step back and we think about our own experiences navigating the world, and then we want to ensure that other people are provided opportunities to navigate differently, to navigate better, to not have to struggle. Like, that's the beauty of community-based organizations. And that's the beauty of a place like Gwen's Girls. I don't work for Kathy. I'm not on her board. So I don't have any connection to promoting Gwen's Girls or even the Homewood Children's Village, but I just sit back and I think, what amazing human beings to see a need and to try their best to fulfill that need for other people. And so I think, to answer your question, if we're talking about re-engagement, it's to look at what currently exists and to be in direct conversations with the people who have always been leading the way, in ways where we have a lot to learn from them, and we need to center them, and we need to sit back and listen to what they offer, because they've got strategies for doing the work, and we just need to acknowledge those strategies and those people who have always been leading us.
Fantastic. Dana, are there some other things? And then I'm going to put a plug in for some of the great work that United Way is going to be doing this summer. But
I think one more time, just to echo what Valerie said, that there are so many educators and those in non-formal and informal spaces and community-based organizations that have not stopped. They keep on going, they innovate, they find ways to be able to connect with children and young people, to connect with one another, to continue those communities of support. So I think that as we move into the summer months, I guess this now the second summer of the pandemic here, that there will be more and more opportunities, because they haven't stopped learning how to provide these opportunities either. They've continued to innovate. And I look forward to seeing everything that communities are offering, because that's what they've always done. They've always been there. They've always been there to meet the needs of children and families and young people. And that's something that they have not stopped, and that they will only continue to grow in that experience. So, in echoing again what Valerie said, lean on those who are in it and have never left it.
absolutely. And there's no better organization than United Way, right? For always being in the middle of things and making sure that they're working as a key community partner. And I see as a bridge. So as a bridge between Pittsburgh Public Schools, the Allegheny Intermediate Unit, and community organizations. So this summer, our friends at United Way are going to launch a Welcome Back summer campaign. So with partnership with the school districts, Department of Human Services, and really look at how we can have a very streamlined way to help community organizations who have been working throughout to be able to have access to some resources, but to be able to work in a coordinated effort with school districts to be able to provide fun summer things, and to have a way so that parents can easily be able to access and understand, what is available, and what are some things that they can help their children enroll in, engage in, and really go back to the joy, right? To think about what is it that their child may want to experience this summer. And hopefully, as more and more adults are getting vaccinated, and hopefully children will too, that we can have an opportunity for children to be able to be in spaces together. So I'm gonna throw you, maybe this might be a curveball question, but I think it's really important to note that because this is a United Way webinar, there's many business people on the call today. So in your thinking, how can employers help this process? So if you were to give advice to employers, what would you say to them? So Dr. Winters, I'll start with you.
I think I'm going to reiterate something I already said, which was that we can't just serve children's needs in a vacuum. We have to be able to serve the needs of the adults around them, and especially the families. Echoing something that Valerie said earlier too, which is extending that grace. I am not going to begin to tell a corporation how to run, because I've never been a part of a corporation. But I do know that humans seem to function best when they know they're cared for and cared about. And that I think that is the business of every business, to make sure that the humans within it are valued and cared for and cared about. And that extends absolutely as those same adults are trying to navigate and care for and care about the young people in their lives too. So it goes back to making sure that we're supporting all of the adults around children and that community of support as well, not just diving right into children and skipping over the needs of the adults too.
Thanks for that. Valerie?
Sure. So Dana said, I think she said, you said, and I quote, "You're not going to tell corporations how to run." Well, I will. And I've never worked for a corporation. I'm not going to. I'm kidding. I will say this. I will tell corporations, like I will tell schools and colleges of education and universities, the same message. In the School of Education at Pitt, we have this mission vision statement. It's kind of long and lengthy. I'm not going to read it, but it ends with, we teach, we think, we dream, we lead with integrity. And it's that part there. It's like we think, we dream, we lead with integrity. And so what I think I would have to say is, how do you understand integrity? How do you define it? How do you exhibit integrity? And it's a combination of extending grace and having integrity. And if we have both of those things, I just think that it means that we pause and we think deeply about who the people are who surround us, whether it's in our industry, our jobs, our homes, our communities. And as we do that, like really think about what it is that I would want this person to give me if this person were in charge. And then do that. And literally do it. Give people an extension of that grace. And you give people an opportunity to just be themselves and don't make them into anyone else. Give people an opportunity to always learn and always grow, because hopefully people give us the opportunity to always learn and always grow. It has to be a reciprocal, mutually beneficial process. And that's what I would offer. Get a big banner that says, "I lead with integrity, and therefore we all do," and then figure out what that means and provide opportunities for that integrity to take center stage. And let me just say this, it does not mean that we know all of everything. We don't. none of us will ever know all of everything there is to know, but we continue to inquire and we continue to search and learn. And that's the same thing that we have to do if we are in leadership positions. And even if we're not, we've got to give people that extension of grace, and we have to do it with integrity.
Yes, that is so right. And as I think back on the last question before us, the panelists talked a lot about this as well. And I think it's going to be really important for business leaders to note that it's going to be challenging for childcare facilities, community organizations, and schools to be at capacity, right? So even though all of these organizations want to welcome children and youth back, we still have to remember CDC guidelines. So parents, if I may offer a bit of advice, are going to need flexibility. So if you have been able to offer flexibility throughout this year, thank you for that. And continue that, because it may be challenging for parents to find a space. I know there's lots of people working together to help to make it easier, but it is not going to be as seamless, or not that it ever was really seamless, but it's not going to be as easy as it was in summers as past. So if you are an organization that has offered flexibility, providing that flexibility to your employees is, has to be continued. And I would also offer, as we move through this recovery phase, that you don't lose that sense of integrity and flexibility and treating your employee holistically too, remembering that employees bring their whole self to work with them. So that means they bring the people that they care for, whether it's children or parents. So remembering that as you continue to work through those workplace policies. I'm going to switch to some of the questions, and I think this one builds off of this. One of the questions is that someone on the webinar's child has some anxiety about returning back to school or returning to camp this summer. What is some advice you could give this parent, or what are some things you're thinking about to really help children be able to enter those spaces feeling safe? And I'll send it to you, Dana.
I think the anxiety is something that is natural. The world around them is changing, and the world around them has been dictated to them quite frequently. And so I think that acknowledging that nervousness is something that is a valid thing to feel, that it's okay to feel that way. Maybe even offering up that sometimes as adults we feel that way too, so that they know that they're not alone, especially for young children. Seeing a family member or an adult who is close to them that can feel that same way helps us to be able to think about that as an emotion that's okay to feel, and it's not something to feel shame. I think that there's so much that is unknown still, that it can be very hard to give the answers that we would hope to give to our children. And so the certainties are very difficult, and it's difficult to then answer some questions because we don't know what may happen next. Owning up to not knowing is important too, but it also acknowledging that there are a lot of people working very hard to make sure that things are safe, to be sure that children are taken care of, and that there are people doing that hard job. And it's not necessarily always the job of the child to be doing that type of work, that they can feel maybe more comfortable going back to play and to something that seems familiar to them, instead of needing to worry about what comes next of the future. Not always something that we can do well, but always a thought that can possibly be there. I know with my own children, when they returned back to school, and there were a lot of questions around uncertainties, from personal experience, my oldest daughter felt very comfortable knowing that no one had answers, and that she wasn't the only one without the answers. And so that people are working together to find those answers, and that she can be a part of that answer finding as well.
Yeah, building on that a little bit, Valerie, I'm going to expand on that to ask the question that some children have lost motivation or even are afraid to engage with friends. Is there something more? This anxiety is real, so maybe you could expand on that just a little bit more about motivation.
Sure. The anxiety is real. It's particularly real in our kids, but it's also real in us. And as humans, I think we all have a responsibility to get to a place where we can talk openly and honestly about our feelings. We all have to be able to process our feelings and think deeply about, why is it that I am anxious? And maybe I don't know why, or maybe it's because I feel the world is crumbling all around me and there's nothing that I could do. And to not always try to figure out an answer for it. I think it goes back to what I talked about earlier in terms of listening, like really listening and being in the moment, being in the space with other people, whether it involves staring and looking in one's eyes or just holding someone's hand or just being there, sitting next to that person. I mean, it also involves all the emotions of tears and cries and the pain that we experience, and to pretend as if those emotions are not part of this entire process of how we are and who we are. I think we do a disservice if we think that we need to be this, these strong people who can't show any emotion, because we have to. And when we talk about young folks, if they never see us as emotional beings, then how do we expect them to be okay being emotional beings? Our kids and our young adults, as we all are, we are agentive, we are whole human beings already, even our kids. And anxiety is a part of this. It's a part of the experience of us being in a pandemic. I mean, it's a part of the experience of living in a racist nation and world. It is a part of, it's a part of all of it. And if we do not have opportunities to think and talk and listen and be in community with other people, if we can't talk about mental health, if we can't talk about therapy, if we can't talk about counseling and counseling services, like we oftentimes think that we can do everything ourselves, and we can't. And it is, whether it's showing vulnerability, I argue that it's showing the wholeness and the realness of who we are. And if we're not talking about the processes that we have to use in order to remain whole human beings or to get back to that point, then we do a disservice for the kids and the young adults who are watching us. And so we have to be vulnerable human beings, and we have to admit, there are things that scare me. There are things that I am fearful of. And how do I not get taken over by my fear? How do I understand that fear is being a part of who I am, but it's not who I am? And that requires us to always be in constant communication and discovering who we are in relation to other people.
So Valerie and Dana, there's a very specific question related to this that says anxiety, fear, and loss of motivation are all real. How do we get services to children in a school or after school setting without them needing an official mental health diagnosis, even if it's just for a year? This model is needed. Do you know of any models out there that can help address this? Thank you, Dr. Wallace, for that question.
So I don't know of any models, Dr. Wallace. I don't know of any models. And maybe there are some. I continue to search for some. The point in your question here, particularly about without them needing an official mental health diagnosis, I just think that we have to get to a place where every human being is afforded mental health counseling and support. I think sometimes we think we don't need it. Every single human being, and especially when we think about schools, every kid and every young adult, let alone every teacher and administrator, like we all should be afforded mental health support and mental health counseling. We need to figure out a way to talk about mental health and what we do inside of our schools, what we do in our leadership team meetings, what we do in our community-based organizations, instead of the stigma that oftentimes accompanies mental health counseling and support. And so without a diagnosis, we all need mental health support. And I just think that we have to get to a place where we're using language differently and we're engaging in services where it becomes something that is a part of everything that we do inside of schools and in communities. It's not a, oh, I can't talk about it. It's a guess what? And maybe we find joy in actually being able to have that support and being able to use that support. Just one quick example, in the School of Ed at Pitt, we decided, Dr. Dancy, who's Associate Dean for Equity and Justice, and the two of us had conversations for a period of time. And it's like, how do we continue to function? Like, we are talking about preparing educators and researchers to go into the world. And how do we continue to lead this work if we're not talking about mental health? And so we have designed an entire series on mental health support and awareness, and we provide it for our faculty, our staff, and our students, and for ourselves. Like, that's what we've got to do. And if we can't do it and we can't talk about it, how do we go into the world and play and discover who we are? Like, those things are so intricately connected that I think that we've got to normalize it.
Absolutely. It goes back to that we can't think about us as human beings in silos. All of this is connected, our mental health, our social emotional health, our physical health. So excellent points. I have a couple pretty big questions here, so hopefully we can get through them. So Dana, what do you think the long-term impact of the pandemic is going to be on our kids? I know that's a big question.
Well, considering that this time last year I said, oh, don't worry, everything will be done by June, I don't think that I am in any seat to be making, far-reaching predictions. However, wow, that is a big question. And I think that it's incredibly hard to say, but I also think that the long-term impacts of what happens has a lot to do with what happens next and how we react and how we come together as a community to listen to one another, to support one another, to be there to grow and learn together. The story of the pandemic has not been written completely yet. There is still so much story to be written. And we have the ability to come together to support one another in whatever way that we can. That we've all got, again, to evoke Fred Rogers, something worth giving to one another to help to come together as a community to support children, to support the adults in their lives and beyond. So I think that it's hard to make a prediction of what the long-term effects will be because we haven't seen the end of the pandemic yet. We haven't seen the final part to turn the page of the chapter. We're turning pages, but that chapter's not over yet, and we still have a lot to write.
So let me throw out to the both of you then this question. If we want to look back and say that we got this right, the return and how we recovered from this, what do we need to do now, or how would you like that book to look? I know, it's a big question.
All right, so I'm going to do some dreaming here.
Awesome. It's always good to dream, right?
Yeah, I would want it to look. First of all, I have to say, wow, that's an emotional question. I have to say that I would want to start with honest, full recognition of the many lives that we have lost.
Yes.
Because of this pandemic, but because also of racism and racial violence. Like we've got to not just become so desensitized to pain. And we have to stop and pause and we've got to be whole human beings. And that requires us to be honest about the things that have troubled us, the things that pain us, the things that make us cry late at night or early into the morning, the loss that people have experienced, and, and the toll of that loss, the human lives that have been lost and the families that have been devastated. And yet we get up every day and we continue to push forward. And sometimes we got to push forward by also just pausing to acknowledge that this is a lot. This pain is a lot. So I want to first say, whatever we do to move forward has to be an acknowledgement of all of these histories that have led us to where we are. It also has to be an acknowledgement of the pain that we feel. I mean, our kids are experiencing pain, but I think we are too, and particularly educators. And so we cannot think that we do not have to have better structures in place that support the socio-emotional, mental health, physical, intellectual, daily living needs of people. We have to. And we know that we can do things differently. This is the thing that pains me. We know that we can do things differently. We are not absent of resources in this country, let alone in this world. We continue to do this divide and conquer thing. And it's like, if we can quickly get technologies in the hands of some folks, then we know we can do better for all folks. So what I want to see a world where people are not so ego driven. We're not living in silos. We're not territorial. We are providing experiences for people, even if we didn't have those experiences. And those experiences are grounded in love and care and joy. It's like, I don't want to see kids struggle. So I'll say that. I don't want to see kids struggle. And I think that we know what we should do differently. And we just got to get to the work of doing it. We've got to sacrifice something in this. And if we're not willing to sacrifice, we will be here forever. And I don't want to sound so bleak. I want to sound hopeful, but that's how I feel.
I think it is hopeful. And I think that this past year has ripped off Band-Aids. It has gotten to the root causes of institutional racism and the inequities that our children face. And what you said, Dr. Kinlock, of how we need to put our children and youth first. And if we can come on the other side of this with a shift, and that our babies, our children, our youth are our number one best resource, right? And that we have to think about how all of their needs work together, and what they, not just needs, how their joy, how do we have their joy drive our policy moving forward from this? And that we as adults have to put our children's lives first. So Dana, I don't know if you want to add to what you and Dr. Kinlock will write these last chapters. I see maybe a book in the making, and I bet there's a lot of children that would love to help write that book of what the world could be after COVID-19. But go ahead, Dana.
It's very hard to follow what Valerie just said. I completely agree across everything that she said, and so true too. We can't erase the histories that have happened too, that those have to be lifted up as so monumentally important to how we move forward. And I think the only thing I'll add is to take it a step beyond our educators and our children, to think about all of the many supports around those systems, and how those systems need to be built in a way that trust and respect and support those who are within it. What we've learned across the last year is that our educators and our youth workers, they have continued to provide, they have continued to be there for children. They have put our children first. And we need to in turn put them into the discussion as well. That as systems, we have to do a better job of valuing that work. We have to do a better job of building systems that trust and respect instead of burden and overpressure. And I think that's something that we have absolutely learned, that if we can say, hey, do what you can, then we can certainly loosen up to say, continue to do what you know works. Continue to meet the needs of children because you know what those needs are. And I think building a system that really is focused on that trust and respect is what I hope to see at the end of our book at some point as well.
Dr. Winters and Dr. Kinlock, I don't know how to thank you. This has been such an emotional conversation for a Monday morning, but I think one that's really, really needed. And I so value your expertise and your passion. And I know that I didn't get to many of the questions in the chat, but I'm sure that we will respond to those. And I want to thank everyone out there. And I'm going to throw it back to Bobby. And I think we ended and gave her a nice segue to talk about how we can all become advocates. So thank you again for spending the morning with us. Bobby?
Thank you so much. What a deeply thoughtful, resonant conversation this morning. You all signed up for a program called How Do We Support the Re-Engagement and Reconnection of Our Children and Youth into the Community? And I think what we got was a much bigger, broader, deeper, thoughtful conversation than any of us could have imagined. And I think it speaks to the work that we have to do around our institutions in our community, the opportunity that we have to change and rebuild and re-engage and have more equitable institutions in our community to serve our children and our families. It has been a heck of a year. It's been over a year of our children and our families missing out on so much human interaction and learning and programs and people essential to healthy development. And the anxiety that has grown out of that has been incredible. So we need to think about how we can re-engage children meaningfully, empathetically, equitably. How much of it should focus on academic remediation? And what are the appropriate sustainable solutions for our children in this new reality? How can we encourage and expand the loving spaces and places as we heard about this morning? These are the questions before us. And I thank our panel sincerely and our moderator and everyone for listening and contributing today to help us begin to answer these questions. And it wouldn't be a program about kids and school without a little bit of homework, right? So I want to give you some homework. And this is important because there are some real tangible things that we can all do to be a part of the solution. First, I need you to advocate. The American Rescue Plan is infusing millions of new dollars into our school systems and communities right now. You can find out exactly how much by going to the Pennsylvania Department of Education website and see what your local district is getting. You can lend your voice to ensuring that some of these funds will go to support programs that not only address academic concerns, but the social and emotional issues that we've been talking about this morning. Look for an email from United Way on 3 easy steps you can take to advocate on this front. Second piece of homework, and we've talked a little bit about this as well. When it's safe, go out and have fun. Let's have some joy. Let's expand on that joy. When things begin to open up and it's safer, take your children to museums and libraries and arts venues and other events in the community. It will help them reconnect outside of home and will also really provide important support for organizations in our community that need our help right now. And the third part of your homework is to stay informed. By just being present this morning in a forum like this, you're staying current and educated on the work that's happening to overcome these obstacles that impact our children so deeply. If you're looking for more ways to stay informed, please check out United Way's bi-monthly Pulse Report. We're proud to partner with Allies for Children and the Poise Foundation, as well as the Fourth Economy, to bring these community pulse reports so that you can stay connected to the trends and the issues in our community. And I think we're going to put a link in the chat. There it is, magically appearing again, so you can connect to those community pulse reports. And for our part at United Way, we're going to continue to listen and engage with our 70+ community partners who provide these services to meet the needs of children and youth in Allegheny, Armstrong, Butler, Fayette, and Westmoreland counties. Again, thank you to Michelle Figlar, Dr. Valerie Kinlock, Dr. Dana Winters for sharing your experience, your perspectives, and your thoughtful insights today. And we thank Eden Hall Foundation again for their support to bring programs like this to the community. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, please tell a friend. Be on the lookout for our next The Question Before Us discussion sometime this summer. So stay tuned, and thank you so much for joining us today. Stay well, stay happy, look for ways to bring joy into the lives of your kids and families. Take care. Have a great day.